A Jerusalem Perspective production. Sabbath Breakers by Shmuel Safrai, read by Joshua Tilden. And it came to pass on the second Sabbath between Passover and Shavuot that he was going through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them. And some of the Pharisees said, Why do you do that which is not permitted on the Sabbath? And Jesus answered them and said, Haven't you read what David did when he and his men were hungry, how he entered the house of God and took the showbread, which only the priests are permitted to eat, and ate it and gave it to his men? And he said to them, Man is master of the Sabbath. Luke 6, 1-5. This story is also narrated in the other two synoptic Gospels, Matthew 12, 1-8, and Mark 2, 23-28. But Luke's version is more complete, mentioning such details as the exact time of year when the events took place, spring, the second Sabbath in the cycle of the counting of the Omer, and the fact that it was only some of the Pharisees who accosted Jesus. Although several of the most significant Greek manuscripts of Luke 6:1 read en Sabbato, on a Sabbath, many others have en Sabbato devteroproto, on the first Sabbath. I have chosen the latter reading because it makes better sense in this context. This also is the reading of the Byzantine text, or Textus Receptus, and thus the King James Version translates on the second Sabbath after the first. Later copyists may have omitted devteroproto, second first, because it was a strange word, and because they were not acquainted with the Jewish background of the Gospels. But I feel this reading accurately reflects the Jewish milieu in which the story is set. Note that Franz Delitzsch correctly translated devteroproto in his Hebrew version of the New Testament, and it came to pass on the second Sabbath of the counting of the Omer. Counting the Omer. Luke's narrative clearly was composed within a society familiar with the counting of the Omer. According to halakha, and indeed common practice until today, the counting of the Omer was not just a time during which the Sanhedrin kept track of the 50 days between Passover and Shavuot. Rather, each individual was expected to count those days and to know which day and which week it was within the cycle. Thus, the Babylonian Talmud, Menachot 65b, interprets, And you shall count unto you 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath, the day you bring the sheaf of the wave offering, Leviticus 23:15, in the following manner. The counting is the duty of everyone. Reference to the time of year in the narrative suggests various other relevant facts. The new crop of barley could not be harvested or eaten before the Omer was offered at the temple on the 16th of Nisan, the second day of the Passover festival. One symbolic sheaf was brought to the temple, and finding a ripe sheaf could be difficult because Passover falls just before the beginning of the barley harvest. Sometimes it was necessary to search far afield to find an Omer, and occasionally the only barley to be found was still green, in which case the sheaf would be dried over a fire. The barley harvest had only just begun by the second Sabbath after Passover, and there generally was a shortage of grain at this point in the season. The story is set in the Sea of Galilee region, an area that usually saw its produce ripen earlier than the rest of the country. Even so, it took some time before this new produce reached the markets. Meanwhile, people were craving the taste of grain products. The previous year's grain would have been used up, especially if that year had not been very bountiful. There was a period of only a day or two when there were heads of grain on the ground in the fields. The poor entered the fields immediately after the harvesters left, but did not pick up every last head of grain. They could glean a larger quantity by moving on to another just harvested field. Thus one could always find a few heads of grain in a field even after the harvesters and the poor had been there. but only for a day or two because the birds were also hungry.
This is an Audio JP clip. To listen to the full article, visit the Jerusalem Perspective website at www.jerusalemperspective.com/2488.